I'm excited to read to you from Debbie Ford's Secret of the Shadow. And so I'm going to give it to you one chapter at a time. And here's where we begin, you and your story. Imagine that you knew at birth that you were a master, that you were powerful beyond measure, that you possessed enormous gifts, and that all it would take to deliver your gifts to the world was your desire. Imagine that you came into this world with your heart filled with the healing power of love, and that your only desire was to bestow that love onto all those around you. Imagine that you had the innate ability to create and have all that you want and all that you need. Is it possible that at some point in your life you knew that there was no one else in the world just like you? And that in every fiber of your being you knew that you not only possessed the light of the world, but that you were the light of the world? Is it possible that at one time you knew who you were at the deepest level and you rejoiced in your gifts? Take a moment now and see if you can remember that time when you knew the truth of who you really are. But then something happened. Your world changed. Something or someone cast a shadow on your light. From that moment on, you feared that you and your precious gifts were no longer safe in the world. You felt that if you didn't hide your sacred gift, it might be abused, injured, or taken away from you. Deep inside, you knew that this gift was like a precious, innocent child that was yours to protect. So you did what any good parent would do. You hid all your magnificence deep inside that no one would ever discover it, so that no one could hurt it or take it away from you. Then, with the creativity of a child, you covered it up. You created an act, a persona, a drama, a story, so that nobody would ever suspect that you were the keeper of so much light. You were very smart, brilliant actually, at hiding your secret. Not only did you convince others that you were not that, you also convinced yourself. All because you were being a good parent to the gift that you held. It was your secret. Your deep, dark secret, which only you knew. You are even creative enough to manifest the exact opposite of that which you truly are, so that you could protect yourself from those who might be upset or angered by your innate gifts. But after days, months, and years of hiding your precious treasure, you began to believe your story. You became the persona you created to protect your secret. At that moment, you forgot that you had ever buried your treasured gift in the first place. You not only forgot where you had hidden it, you forgot that you had hidden it at all. Your light, love, greatness, and beauty got lost inside your story. You forgot that you had a secret. From that moment on, you felt lost, alone, separate, and scared. Suddenly you became aware that there was something missing, and there was. The pain of separating from your treasure felt like losing your best friend. Inside, you ached for the return of your true self. So you began to search outside of yourself for something that would fill the void and make you feel better. You looked to relationships, to other people, to your achievements and awards, trying to find that which was missing. You looked to your body and your bank account, trying to get that feeling back. Maybe, like Debbie, you were driven by feelings of unworthiness that ran so deep that you spent most of your life frantically searching for something to complete you. But everywhere you looked, you came up empty. By the time Debbie was 5 years old, she was all too familiar with the voice in her head telling her that she wasn't good enough, that she wasn't wanted, and that she didn't belong. Desperate to feel loved and accepted, She set out on the exhausting task of getting other people to validate her worth. Deep inside, she believed there was something wrong with her, and she went to great lengths to conceal her flaws. She quickly learned how to charm people, flashing her biggest smile to get them to notice her. She thought if she were more talented than her older sister or smarter than her older brother, she would belong and her family would fill her with all the love and acceptance she hungered for. She believed that if they loved her enough, she would no longer have to listen to the awful thoughts that filled her mind or endure the painful feelings that had consumed her small body. And as the years passed, she became skilled at finding ways to hide her pain from herself and others. When she couldn't find someone to validate her or tell her it was okay, she would sneak across the street to the nearby 7-Eleven and buy a package of Sara Lee brownies and a bottle of Coca-Cola. The dose of sugar really seemed to do the trick, but by the age of 12, her pain was too big to hide. She felt too tall, too awkward, and too stupid. She was envious of the girls who seemed to fit in, who wore the right clothes and had the right families. For years, she cried every day, trying to release the inner pain that consumed her. Her tears of sadness always had the same message. Why doesn't anyone love me? What's wrong with me? Please won't someone come and help me? Then, to make matters even worse, one Saturday afternoon when she was 12 years old, her mother informed her and her brother that while they were at the beach, her father had moved out of the house. Their marriage was over, and they were going to get a divorce. The breakup of her family added to her deep-seated fear that she was flawed and damaged, and that she had been dealt a bad lot in life. Her parents' divorce unleashed all the pain that was stored up inside of her. In an instant, every bad feeling she thought she had hidden under control came flooding out of her, and her pain was so overwhelming that to numb it, she turned to drugs, cigarettes, fast friends, in a desperate attempt to fit in and get the love and safety she could not find in her family or in herself. Struggling to make meaning from the emptiness she felt inside, she decided that success was her ultimate ticket to freedom. She began working at the age of 13, and by the time she was 19, she owned her first retail store. She had an eye for fashion, and she loved designing new looks for women to wear. Wearing cool clothes always made her feel better about herself. It seemed that she could cover up her shame, if only for a day, by wearing something everyone liked. She strove to have the coolest, hippest, most trendy look so that she would finally feel like she belonged. And from all outer appearances, she succeeded. She had the right car, the right clothes, and what she considered to be the right set of friends. She had finally made it as a member of the in crowd. But despite all her successes and all her friends, she still felt lost and incredibly lonely. No matter how much she accomplished in the outer world, she could never seem to get away from the internal voice that told her that she would never amount to anything and that her life really didn't matter. In the quiet of the night, her despair overwhelmed her. She felt flawed, small, insignificant, and painfully alone. Managing the insanity of her mind became a full-time job. She began trying to quiet the constant internal noise by drowning herself in drugs. She was hypnotized by her continuous internal dialogue, by the stories she told herself over and over again about how she would never make it, how she would never have the love, security, and inner peace she so desperately desired. That voice filled her head day and night, criticizing her every move and sabotaging her search for success and happiness. She had thought that if she kept busy enough, ate enough brownies, added enough chemicals, or accumulated enough cars and clothes, she could rise above the despair and hopelessness that always seemed to pop up after a moment of joy. But it didn't work. The tape that played in her head would only get louder, showing her her faults and reinforcing her self-imposed limitations. That voice continually reprimanded her, telling her she didn't deserve love, showing her her faults and reinforcing her self-imposed limitations. Finally, exhausted, she would surrender to her inner tyrant, saying, "Okay, you win." And then she would reach for another bag of M&Ms, a cigarette, a tranquilizer, and temporarily pacify her angst. But it only took moments before the self-loathing would return, and the story about how awful she was would pick up where she had left off. In her early 20s, she added men to her prescription for pain relief. Unfortunately, her relationships with men always seemed to backfire. They began with a high that held the promise of salvation and ended with a low that left her deeper in the hole than when she began. Meanwhile, her substance abuse escalated to a point where she knew she would not live much longer if she continued down that path. She spent years going in and out of drug treatment centers trying to straighten out her life. Then one day, as she was sitting in her fourth treatment center, participating in yet another group therapy session, a huge realization hit her. As she sat there listening to everyone share their pain, she became spellbound by their words. As other members of her group shared their trials and tribulations and their failures and disappointments, she heard a common theme, a storyline coming out of each person's mouth. She was amazed by how committed each person was to their individual painful drama and how sure they were that their story was the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. She saw people in her group sacrifice love in order to pay homage and remain true to their negative story they told about their lives. She watched other people holding on as if for dear life to their miserable sagas, trying to convince everyone, all of them, how bad and how true their stories were. Some people were proud of their stories, as if their struggles and sacrifices made them somehow superior to the rest. Others were drenched in self-righteousness by sheer virtue of the depth of their pain. Suddenly, in a flash of clarity, she was able to hear something underneath each person's saga. Their stories were just that. Stories. Fictional tales whose repeated telling was a distraction masking a much deeper truth. She vividly remembers one group session in particular. Jessica was a pretty blonde 28-year-old woman whose face hung low with bitterness and defeat. She began the session that day by dramatically reciting the same story she had been telling them for the past 8 or 9 weeks. It went something like this. My mother doesn't love me. My father left me when I was 3. My boyfriend doesn't know who I am. Debbie sat there frustrated, wanting to pull her hair out. She just couldn't listen to that same story for one more minute. She sounded like a broken record, playing over and over and over the same bad song. And she thought the least she could do was play us a new tune. She wanted to stand up and scream, "Get out of your story! Don't you get it? Can't you see you're telling yourself a story that will always end the same way?" She wanted so badly for Jessica to see that she was keeping herself stuck inside her dead-end tale. But of course, she was bound by the limitations of what she now knew was her own story, which told her, "You don't know anything. You don't know what you're talking about, so stay in your seat and keep your big mouth shut." Obeying that voice, Debbie slouched back in her chair and slipped back deeper into her own story. Her silence was itself proof that her story had complete power over her. She couldn't bear to listen to Jessica whine for one more moment. She tuned her out and turned all her attention onto herself. As Jessica's voice faded into the background, she began to hear her own internal dialogue. "Nobody loves me. I can't do this. I'll never be happy. I'm too skinny and too ugly. My life doesn't matter. And the ever familiar, no one cares about me anyway." She was sitting there, and as she was sitting there, it struck her, just like Jessica, she too was repeating the same internal dialogue over and over, reciting a version of her life she had heard a million times before. She was shocked to discover that her storyline wasn't that much different than Jessica's. She was just speaking hers out loud. And as she sat there listening to herself, she was struck by the theme of her story, chanting like a mantra in her mind, "Poor me, poor me, poor me." Then suddenly, the lights went on and she realized, oh my God, my life is just a story too. And until that day, sitting in a treatment center in West Palm Beach, Florida, she had been asleep inside her story. She was letting her story run her life without even knowing it. Everything she did was consistent with and constricted by this story, and her actions were desperate attempts to make the prison of her story a little better, a little more palatable, a little more livable. She was always making some minor adjustment, a new boyfriend, a new job, a new haircut, in an attempt to bury her pain and hide the evidence of her inadequacy. She had so mistaken her story for reality that making all these changes were like rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. The ship was sinking while she, blinded to the reality of the situation, was busy trying to make it look good and feel better while it was going down. It finally occurred to her that there must be more to her than that story that she was telling herself. Just as she could see that Jessica, even while stuck in her story, was more than she thought she was, she realized that she too must be more than her negative thoughts told her that she was. And in that moment, she surrendered to the fact that even though she had unknowingly spent years trying to fix her story, that she couldn't. True, it was a part of her, but certainly it wasn't the whole her. And although she didn't have a clue as to what was beyond her story, she set out that day on a journey to understand why she had created this story and what purpose it served. She spent the next 10 years of her life examining not only her own story, but the stories of others. While on this journey, she learned 3 very important things. First, we create our life stories in our attempt to become someone or something. Second, our stories hold the key to our unique purpose in life and to its fulfillment. And third, hidden in the shadow of our story is a very special secret. Once the secret is unveiled, we will stand in awe of the magnificence of our own humanity. The secret, the theme, and the shadow. Our stories have a purpose. Even though they set our limitations, they also help us define who we are so we don't feel completely lost in the world. Living inside them is like being inside a clear capsule. The thin, transparent walls act like a shell that traps us inside. Even though we have the ability to gaze outside and view the world around us, we stay safely trapped inside, comfortable with the familiar terrain, bound by an inner knowing that no matter what we do, think, or say, we can go no further. Our stories separate us and draw clear boundaries between ourselves, others, and the world. They limit our capabilities and shut down our possibilities. Our stories keep us apart even while we are begging to belong and fit in. They drain our vital energy, leaving us feeling tired, depleted, and hopeless. The predictability of our stories feed our resignation and guarantees our fate. When we are living inside our stories, we engage in repetitive patterns, habits, abusive behaviors, and abrasive internal dialogues. Like all good stories, our personal dramas always have a theme, which repeats itself over and over throughout our lives. We can decipher our unique themes by listening carefully to the conclusions we have made about the events of our lives. These conclusions shape our existence and drive our personalities. Our conclusions become our shadow beliefs, the unconscious beliefs that control our thoughts, words, and behaviors. Our shadow beliefs establish our limits, the unconscious beliefs that control our thoughts, our words, and our behaviors. Our shadow beliefs establish our limits. They tell us how much love, how much happiness, and success we are not worthy of. They shape our thought processes and define our personal boundaries, disguising themselves as the truth. Our shadow beliefs rob us of self-expression and squelch our dreams. But what's important to realize is that our shadow beliefs contain the very wisdom we need to transcend our current limitations and our discontent. They motivate us to compensate for our shortcomings and drive us to become the opposite of what we tell ourselves we are. Our shadow beliefs drive us to prove that we are worthy, that we are lovable, that we are important. But left unattended, these shadow beliefs turn on us, sabotaging the very things we most desire by letting their negative messages limit our lives. Why you need your story. We stay wrapped in our stories, securely placed inside our capsules, so we can hold on to the comfort of what we know and rest in the safe and familiar feelings of being at home. When life gets difficult and we begin to confront the pain of our own limitations or the disappointment of living below our self-imposed standards, at least we can count on one thing: the predictability of our stories. Our stories give us something and someone to identify with. The worst feeling for a human being is to feel like a nothing, that our lives and our individual existences don't matter. Most of us would much rather endure being an unlovable person than someone who is completely invisible. So, in a desperate attempt to give our lives meaning, we create and then repeat our stories, and as we cling to who we think we are, we perpetuate our dramas. Then, gradually and unwittingly, we actually become our dramas. We act out our stories and carry them around like badges of honor. We become invested in keeping our stories alive, and in the process, we unknowingly become victims of the stories we create to protect our secret. We become victims of life. When we recognize that we have identified ourselves with our stories and not with our broader, deeper, truer selves, our first impulse is to get rid of the story. But because we have become our stories and have allowed them to dictate the scope and course of our lives, a scary question arises. If we aren't our stories, who are we? Outside our stories, it feels scary and uncontrollable. It reeks of unpredictability and uncertainty. We fear that if we let go of our dramas, we will lose our identity in whatever place we hold in the world. Who will protect us? Who will love us? To what will we belong? This is a devastating prospect for any human being. The unconscious fear that drives our stories is that if we surrender our identity, slow down, and go inside, we will be devoured by the emptiness. Our resistance to being nothing, to having nothing, and to being a nobody is at the very core of our human struggle. Our fear of non-existence is so deep that most of us settle for a repackaged version of the self we know than rather wake up inside of the unknown. Debbie spent most of her life struggling to be a somebody, to have a purpose and a life of meaning. Yet, over the years of her spiritual search that taught her that in order for her to be free, to be the special, unique woman that she was, she must embrace both the vastness of her divinity and the insignificance of her humanity. She must embrace the fact that she was everything and nothing. Her rabbi, Moshe Levin, once told her a story that comes from the Talmud. A person is asked to write on a piece of paper these words: "I am nothing but dust and ashes," and to place that piece of paper in his pocket and meditate upon it. He is then asked to write on another piece of paper the words, "The entire universe was created just for me," and place it in his other pocket. As the seeker meditates on both realities at the same time, he realizes that both are true. If we look at life from the largest perspective, we see that we are merely specks. Until we embrace our absolute nothingness and our own insignificance, we will forever be chasing the experience of being somebody. But once we surrender to the fact that we are everything and nothing, once we embrace both the story and beyond, the shadow and the light, we become whole, integrated human beings. We open ourselves up to a world beyond that which we know. We can then have the grand experience of seeing that we belong to and are a vital piece of the entire universe. We will be able to marvel in the realization that the entire universe was created just for us, and then we will grasp the enormity of our true essence. We know that for some of you, this may be a difficult concept, and you may feel not ready for it or uncomfortable with it yet. But we promise you that if you allow yourself to open up to this idea and explore it, a new possibility will arise. When you embrace both your wins and your losses, your frailties and your strengths, your vastness and your nothingness, you will feel safe enough to allow your divine secret to emerge. Only by returning to the state of wholeness will you feel worthy and deserving of expressing the highest truth about yourself. The false self. Our stories are like old friends. Even if they talk too much, at least we know what we are getting. An alternative that feels less threatening than connecting with a group of strangers. Most of us repeatedly choose the comfort of what we know, staying inside our limited realities, just so we don't have to face the terror of that which we don't know. But brewing beneath the surface is a deep discontent about the false self. The false self that we have created and the story that goes along with it. This is where the struggle begins. This discontent is always pushing us, whispering in our ears, there has to be more than this. In order to embrace the enormity of who we truly are and make the journey beyond our limited stories to find our true selves again, we must face the ultimate truth and often the most painful reality, that we were never really separate from the divine. We are a piece in a divine puzzle. We may look separate, we may act separate, and most of us will go to our graves believing that we are separate. But our individuality is nothing but an illusion. It's a painful distraction that keeps us trapped in an endless chase for something more, better, or different than that which we already have. And it's a futile chase, because it's based on the incorrect conclusion that we are somehow flawed. In our separateness, we struggle to create bigger and better versions of ourselves, trying desperately to fix what we believe is broken. We abandon our naturally divine selves and frantically try to ground ourselves in our own unique identities. We forsake our divine selves for our self-image, but that self-image, the identity we are chasing, is not who we are. It's the false self we've created to define ourselves. Our false self is the main character in our stories, and we mistakenly believe ourselves to be that person. It is our persona, the image we create to give ourselves a distinct identity. And our stories are our desperate attempts to make sense of our existence, to define what cannot be defined. They keep our stories, our false selves are where our false selves, our stories are where our false selves reside. Our false selves are the heroes and the victims and the stars of our stories. They keep our stories intact and pacify us with a false sense of predictability and security. Separating from the divine. The moment we identify with our false selves, the moment we believe our stories, ourselves to be our stories, we fall out of the hands of the divine and enter into the small illusion of me, separate and alone. And then the game begins. The game of look at me, I am separate from you. We engage in this charade because it allows us to hold on to the illusion that we are really separate and individual beings. Even if we intellectually understand by this point on our spiritual journey that we are all one, we continue on an unconscious level to fight for the separate life we are familiar with and to avoid the experience of oneness. We believe that if we face the ultimate truth, if we face our oneness, then that uniqueness we cling to will die. But facing that truth is our task. Because living inside our stories and in the illusion of separateness is not really living. It's an endless game of wanting, fearing and wanting. It's a game you cannot win. It's a game of if only. If only I were rich or richer, famous, healthy, smarter, wiser, faster, shrewder, or younger, I'd be able to win this game and find the happiness I deserve. If only I knew more people, had a better job, or had my own business, I would have what I need to be happy. When I get my new house, my new car, new girlfriend, new boyfriend, or some new clothes, I will feel so good. If only I were appreciated, respected, loved, or seen, I would fulfill my deepest desires. Or maybe your game is about getting rid of something. If only I weren't so selfish, fat, lazy, angry, bitter, tired, or broke. If only my children, husband, or mother would stop acting out. Or the big ones. When I finally arrive at my perfect body weight or find my life purpose, then I'll be content. This is an unwinnable game. It's a trap, an endless maze with no way out. We work day and night trying to manipulate, strategize, and figure out ways to win the if only game. But the game lives inside our stories. It was developed to keep us occupied and busy and give us a reference point for our individual identities. But if we are willing to look, we will see that the game is nothing more than a decoy, hiding what is real, covering up our true essence. To end this struggle, we must see that much of what we believe about ourselves is a story. For most of us, it is a disempowering tale. We created our stories in order to give ourselves an identity, and we protect the sacredness of our true essence. And we will need our stories and the secret they hold to lead us back into the presence of our divinity and to unfold the purpose of our lives. Embracing your story. Our stories have a divine purpose. They are a real and necessary part of our personal evolution. Until we understand the importance of our stories, we will stay trapped in the vicious cycle of trying to fix parts of ourselves that aren't broken. Hidden within our personal drama is important information and pearls of wisdom for us to extract that hold the key to fulfilling our unique contributions to the world. Our stories contain the exact ingredients we need to become the people we always long to be. Inside of each of our stories is a divine recipe for a most extraordinary life. The first step in uncovering your recipe is to realize that you created your story not only to protect yourself, but unknowingly to gather the wisdom and experiences that are necessary for you to realize your life's purpose. You created your story in order to learn the lessons it had to teach. You are like a master chef. You have spent your life in the kitchen, cooking up pain and joy, triumph and failure, in order to gather the ingredients necessary to manifest your most extraordinary self. But your story, with all its drama and all its unprocessed pain, conceals this recipe. Most of us get so distracted by the drama of our stories that we no longer remember that we have a divine purpose here at all. We're so committed to the pain of our personal histories and to making others wrong that we don't even realize that all of our pain has a purpose. And this bears repeating. All of our pain has a purpose. It is here to teach us, to guide us, and give us the wisdom we need to deliver our gifts to the world. Most of us use our traumas and our wounds to beat ourselves up, to stay stuck, and to keep ourselves small. But when our pain and disappointment are examined and used as learning tools, they impart sacred life lessons that can be taught to us only in this way. You're here to contribute your own unique flavor and serve the world in a way that only you can. One of Debbie's son's kindergarten teachers, Mrs. Knight, demonstrated this principle to their class. On the first day of school, Mrs. Knight handed all the children who walked into class a piece of jigsaw puzzle with a number on the back. As she called up each student by his or her number, each brought their piece of the puzzle, and Mrs. Knight placed it in the correct position of the cardboard frame that held the puzzle together. There were 20 children and 20 pieces of the puzzle, and when Mrs. Knight finally called number 20, you could see the entire picture on the puzzle except for one piece was missing, which prevented all of the class from seeing the beauty of the entire picture. The little boy had received the piece number 19 was missing from class that day, and in order for the entire picture to be revealed, the class needed his contribution. Thus, Mrs. Knight beautifully illustrated to the children how important each of them were to completing the whole puzzle. Debbie sat there with tears in her eyes, thinking about how each and every one of us represents a vital contribution to the whole of humanity. Each of us has an important piece to contribute to the picture of life. Each of us has an important piece to contribute to the picture of life. I had to get that right. When we are stuck in the past, hating ourselves, hating our lives, hating our stories, it is impossible to claim our piece of the puzzle and put it in its destined place. Until we make peace with our stories, it's impossible for us to extract the ingredients we need to express our divine selves. All of our drama, each of our experiences, the parts of ourselves that we love and the parts we hate is what make our unique piece unique. I'm going to say that again. All of our drama, each of our experiences, the parts of ourselves that we love and the parts we hate is what makes our pieces unique. Some of us got the middle piece of the puzzle, some the end, while others got the big round piece. There is no other piece of the puzzle just like yours. None. There are similar ones, but nothing like yours. Every day you call forth experiences perfectly suited to gathering the wisdom required to produce your unique recipe, your piece of the puzzle. So now we are complete with the first chapter, and you can go and find your assignments.